Hey there, Zero to Mastery community. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Mo, and I'm an instructor here at the Zero to Mastery Academy. This is my very first AMA, so bear with me because I'm kind of new to this. But I want to thank each and every one of you who took the time to submit your amazing questions, and I'll definitely try my best to get through all of them. Now, if I don't get to your question, please make sure to drop it in the chat if you're watching live, or in the comments if you're watching this later on. I don't want to bore you with a long background about myself, but super quickly before we dive into all of the questions, I'm a full-time software engineer and solution architect working for Wrangle.io, and I have 7 years of professional experience in software development. Now, to get more into detail on that, please visit my bio, but what I want to say is that earlier this year, I released a course with Andrei. For those of you who took it, it was the SQL course, the SQL Bootcamp Zero to Mastery, and this was almost 6 months ago. And I have to say, seeing your response and seeing you all take the course and learn so much and give me your feedback has been amazing. However, I have to say that my true passion has always lied with React Native. Now, throughout the years, I've done a tremendous amount of React Native development, both personally and professionally for some of the biggest firms. And this course has been in development for well over a year. And I can tell you that it's well worth the wait. I'm very passionate about the things that we're going to teach you. And I truly hope to see you learn everything that you can out of this course, but also build the amazing apps that we're putting forward. Now, enough about me rambling on. Let's get to some of the amazing questions you submitted. So first off, I wanted to thank everyone who submitted questions. There was a lot of good ones, and hopefully I'll be able to answer all of them, if not most of them. There were a few broad categories in which questions arose. A lot of them had to do with my personal experience. Some of them were about React Native versus alternatives. Some of them were specifically about React Native and questions about the course. And some of them were just general career advice. Now, I'll start with some of the questions that are specifically about my personal experience. And we'll start with the easiest one. How did I meet Andrei? Now, Andrei and I met at his former place of work where I still currently work, which is Wrangle.io. It's a consultancy based in Toronto, and Andrei was working there when I first started. Now, I moved from Belgium to come work in Toronto. And when I moved, Andrei was already working for Wrangle, and I had just come in. And I was still getting acquainted to the Toronto scene. And as I was working through it, we crossed paths a couple of times. But it wasn't until I started wanting to get into online courses that Andrei reached out and asked me if I wanted to be an instructor for ZTM. And so that's specifically when we got closer. But we did overlap on some projects and share some ideas here and there, which was where I saw how smart Andrei actually was, and we had some very thoughtful conversations about tech in that time. Now from there, I kind of want to talk about my experience with React Native, because my experience with React Native started earlier in Belgium. This was back in 2016, I believe, when it was first starting to come out. I was a heavy advocate of React at the time. And at the time, I was also consulting, but I was consulting in Belgium for a different company. And we had started looking at React Native as an alternative. They were a mobile development shop named iCaps. And they were specifically starting to look at starting a web development base. And me coming out of college at the time, we kind of looked at me to start off in that web development track. I was one of their first web developers. And shortly after, they were primarily focused on iOS and Android. They had a lot of excellence in that particular domain. So I learned a lot about actual native app development even before I started React Native, just through osmosis of working there. And what I can say is that when we got into React and Angular and all this stuff, and we started to consult for clients on behalf of, all of these different large and small scale projects, oftentimes the question arose, hey, we want to build a mobile app, but we don't want to eat the cost of both having to launch Android and an iOS team and giving it to one person isn't necessarily versatile because there's a lot that goes into it. And so at the time, you had a couple of options. You could go with Ionic and you could do a web framework, or you could try to do a PWA, and they weren't as well supported back then as they are now. But React Native came at this interesting intersection in time where it was trying to solve for both problems. And what I mean by that is it was JavaScript, and you had this ability to leverage real technology, right? Like real tangible JavaScript, and transform that into what was a native experience. Because at the Ionic and PWAs, they still run in a browser, but being able to write web technology and then transform that and transpile that down to native components, native experiences was extremely revolutionary at the time. And so from my web development experience working for a mobile shop first, iOS and Android, they had a lot of leads in this space. And particularly for startups, they were looking to get into this phase of trying to get clients in and convincing them that, eating that upfront cost of iOS and Android, if you're an early phase startup or you don't know yet, well, you can take this route of experimentation with React Native. And, depending on your needs, you can grow within React Native all the way throughout the company's life cycle, even just leave it like that, or you could grow into full native apps if you got to the point where your startup needed to expand that offering, but React Native offered this versatility. And on the other end of the spectrum, it also offered large-scale enterprises the chance to commoditize and centralize their code base into JavaScript while still having that leverage point of being able to extend natively, right? With Ionic, there were drawbacks. You couldn't really run native code, and you couldn't take existing application code and inject all of this stuff, right? You didn't have an escape hatch to native. But in React Native, you had this, I can write JavaScript, and when I need to, I can write Java, or I can write Objective-C, or I can write Swift, and I have this escape hatch to native when I need to do native extensions. And so you had a little bit of the best of both worlds. Now in practice, of course, these things become hard, right? And we started consulting, and we started bringing on clients that were either early phase startups that didn't want to eat the cost of having two teams, or we even did migrations for larger scale firms that didn't have complex apps that had some native flows, but could commoditize 90% of the app into JavaScript and not have to eat that whole cost, right? That's extremely important, right? And this is something that I want to give to you is when you're making a technology choice, you have to make a technology choice that makes sense for your company at the time, because technology will continuously shift and shift and shift. It's never going to stop, but it's about making the decision that makes the most sense at the time. If you're a small scale startup and you don't have a lot of expertise in all of these domains, but you have a very, very, very strong and solid web developer and web development team, well, it makes sense for them to have that leverage point of familiarity in their technology and then grow that base, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I got started in React Native. And well, how did I become a full stack and solution architect from there? So having lived in Belgium for that period of time and having consulted and brought on clients for this particular reason, I kind of, throughout life met my partner, and she happened to be from Canada, and I moved out here. I found a job. I went to a conference. I spoke about some of the things I'm speaking about right here, and I met a company, Wrangle, and moved out here. And so their needs were a bit different than what ICAP's needs were back in Europe, because Europe was heavily on this React Native train, while North America was very big in the Angular space, but also in React at the time. And so my shift focused away from React Native for the first couple of months, but then what ended up happening was React Native took a resurgence when I came here in late 2016. And I had a lot of experience with it, and I had a lot of experience with hands-on mobile development. And we happened to have a client at the time that was a Fortune 500, and they were building out a large-scale React Native app to try to leverage online storage. And at the time when we were building out this app, I got onto the project, and I quickly was able to showcase a lot of my skill sets across mobile development. But before then, I had also showcased my skills across front end. And on this project, I also got to showcase back end. And so naturally, when people talk about full stack development, when people talk about full stack developers, it's kind of, it's hard because all of these areas are specialties. And because they are specialties, you cannot, from a full stack development perspective, say that you are a specialist in each of these domains. That's not how full stack development works. But it's about understanding enough across these domains to be able to make decisions and answer the concerns that come up when developing an application. So we're talking about the ability to write a backend system, a microservice, when we need to do something small, and being able to scale that up and bring a team around it, or being able to pivot into React Native and being able to understand what needs to happen and understand the guidelines and the rules that go into, native iOS and native Android development. These are extremely important concepts. Now, then we get into web development space, and again, it's completely different because a browser isn't made to fit in a phone screen, and a phone screen isn't made to fit in a browser. And, a server isn't meant to have, render visuals. Back in the day, we did do this. We had MVC patterns, but now we've segregated each and every step of the way into this multi-mode of, single page application, microservices, and all this stuff. So being a full stack developer became this understanding of all of these different domains that used to be entangled together. And then specifically, a solution architect is another type of role completely. Because, as I said with the full stack development, when people call themselves a full stack developer, what they're trying to aim at is, I know everything. But you don't. Let's be honest, you don't. You'll never know as much as someone that's specialized in one of those areas. Just like a general practitioner, a GP, will never know as much as a surgeon about brains. That's what happens. But with the full stack development experience, what I was able to do is generalize my knowledge across multiple domains. And one of my biggest passions, I would say, about mobile development and development in general is architecture. How do we scale things? How do we think about taking this idea of software, and a product, and then take that product and break it down into the pieces that need to be built and make the technology choices. And then once you make those technology choices, okay, set up a structure and a code quality gateway and testing and all of these different things. So you're going one level up above the code. And then above the code, you're also making decisions about how we're going to structure things. Okay, we're going to have a single page application. We're going to have multiple modules. We're going to have a backend system. We're going to structure the backend system into these microservices. We're going to put a gateway in front of it, a gateway being a manager of sorts in front of the API endpoints. And kind of thinking about how to structure software was really, really crucial in me becoming an architect, as well as just hands-on project experience. You can't become what they would call an architect or a full stack developer or any type of developer by that means without gaining experience. Now, to become a developer, there are multiple pathways, but some jobs, just like becoming a surgeon, require you to do the job. You need to do the job. There's only so much theory that we can throw at you. And at that point, you need to start experiencing firsthand the problems and come up with pragmatic solutions. Now, pragmatism is one of those things that, I value highly. It's the ability to take action while juggling the responsibilities in a good way and not going overly idealistic and over architecting something and so those are things, that intuitions that you get and learn as you see more and more software problems. As you see more and more problems in general, you get an intuition for solving them, and you see different ways of solving them, and you see what works and what doesn't. Now, the coolest real world project that I've done in React Native, that first project I told you about, where we had to build this project for a Fortune 500 company, was pretty epic. But then came a very cool project following that. So I've in total launched about 3 or 4 apps into the App Store with React Native, and one of them really stood out to me. It was a mobile mechanic platform, and so we were building an app to send mechanics to you to fix your car and do tire changes and all of this stuff. And it posed a lot of interesting challenges in terms of geolocation and how we're going to go about this stuff. It really intrigued me to a point that I was really excited about it. And so that was one of the coolest projects I ever worked on and was a part of. And we had a great team. We meshed well. Now, obviously, I can't go into what specific companies some of these projects were for, as there are NDAs and so forth. But just the concepts of the products alone that I've worked on have been very deep. And actually, through one of the projects that I did, you can find one of the libraries that I worked on, which was React Native Fast Image. Now, my friend and former colleague Dylan Van did 90% of the coding on this project, and then launched it to GitHub, and it's become one of the most popular React Native packages for image handling. But early on in one of the projects that we worked on together on React Native at Wrangle, we conceptualized this idea of commoditizing, image caching through native packages in Android and iOS specifically, and built this React Native package around it that he then took and built out into this gigantic monster in the React Native scene. If you've never used React Native Fast Images, it's absolutely a fantastic library. All right, so now that we have some of the easy ones out of the way, and I know I tend to ramble on, I'm a talker, talk, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. This was definitely a question that a lot of people asked, that boiled down to React Native versus Flutter. And so I'll read a few of them and answer them directly, but also just talk high level about React Native versus Flutter. Now, one of the specific questions that came in is, everyone keeps telling me that Flutter is better than React Native. I have not gotten into any of them yet, but since everyone is talking about Flutter, I was thinking of going ahead and learning Flutter. But you guys are here teaching React Native, so I don't know what to do now. I feel your pain. When choosing to learn a technology, it's always so hard. It's everything shifts constantly, and you get fatigue. You're like, what do I do? So let me get into some of the specifics. Right? There's this big battle with Flutter and React Native going on. One is backed by Google, the other is backed by Facebook, and they're going head to head. Now, at the end of the day, what I can tell you is both are valuable to learn. And I know that's not the answer you want to hear, but here's my reasoning behind it. Both have a place in the market space because they're trying to do hybrid development, but they do it in a different way, right? They're coming at it from different angles. Facebook's approach is, you have one technology, React. And now, knowing that one technology, you can bridge the gap across all of these different platforms. Now, some of you may come at me and say, Mo, learning Dart isn't hard. May not be, but it's a pain. It's definitely a pain to learn a different language just to build a mobile app. Well, that's what a lot of people used to do. But if you're building apps for your company and you're already using React, well, why not just leverage that same technology, that same knowledge, that same foundation, and build your native app? Why not cross the bridge? On top of that, React Native has a much wider adoption in the business space. There generally are higher salaries for React Native developers right now, And on top of that, well, what I can say is that the benefits of React Native lie in the fact that you have this true one language target all approach. With Flutter, you have advantages in certain spaces, and I'm not going to say that Flutter isn't better at certain things than React Native, or React Native is better at certain things than Flutter, because that head-to-head battle, at the end of the day, we can go and we can learn any given framework at any given time, and it's about the decision making that works best for your product. It's about what works best for the outcomes that you're trying to drive. Now, if the outcome the students is trying to drive is, maybe I want to get a job. Maybe on my existing job, I'm using React. Maybe I want to learn how to make these decisions. And so if you're looking to get a job, well, the React Native market space for jobs is way bigger than Flutter. That's just guaranteed right now because there's wider adoption, there's more applications, and a lot of people are using React and subsequently React Native. With that comes generally a higher salary right now. If you're already using React, well, it makes sense to go toward React Native. Why would you make your life harder? Why would you say, well, in this ecosystem, I'm suddenly going to use everything different? It's just going to make you slower. It just is. And so with that, it's continuous draw. Like, of course, Flutter is going to be more performant because it's rendering everything down. Just, it's C++, it's straightforward. The performance is pretty high. But it's not to say that, generally speaking, 99% of the apps we build are not going to be like high performance games. It's going to be like form-based applications with a couple of screens and some fancy animations and a login and kind of like small scale things. If you're targeting like super performant, like stock trading, the visualizations need to render within a fraction of a second type of stuff. These days I would give the edge to Flutter, although I've built similar applications in React Native and tend to work. It really, it boils down to what you're targeting. And for the majority of students, I feel like you're targeting job opportunity. And so React Native tends to have a lot more variety in the space versus Flutter. Every year you're going to find the technology that's better than the last year. Every year. But it's about finding the technologies and picking the technologies that give you the highest opportunity of, first of all, being able to leverage all the technologies together. But second of all, the job opportunity. It's important. We all need jobs. We all need money. I need to buy my snacks. And so, if I want to get paid these days, I would tend to pick React Native for now. It's not to say that, Flutter doesn't have opportunities to grow in market share. And it's not to say that it isn't an amazing technology. What I'm trying to get at here is that the core of, what we target when we try to make these courses is to benefit the students in the best way possible. And so React for web, React Native for mobile, same technology, same knowledge, so much more power. Whereas you're in a company and one day you're writing React and the next day you're writing Dart. And so it really doesn't go hand in hand. Now, if you're doing Angular, like Angular 7, and then you're saying, okay, well, we also need a mobile, cross hybrid app. Well, then I would give Flutter, like with the technology stack of the company, I would give Flutter a better chance of, integrating well within that system. But not a lot of people know Dart, and it's also not used in Angular. So again, you have to learn this separate thing. But again, no knock to it. It's still a great package. It's just, for me right now, if you asked me today, I'd still give React Native the edge because of adoption, because of ease of use, and not because of performance, because the clear winner there would be Flutter in the majority of cases. But performance is a weird argument usually when we're talking about business apps. It's performance for what is usually my question. So think about that when you're making the decision. Now, the next question we have is, the Flutter guys say that Flutter will support web and desktop on top of hybrid development, but React Native only supports hybrid development. So wouldn't it have more benefit if we go with Flutter? I choose React Native. I'm not sure what I want to choose here in terms of the correct path. Now, I have a very, very controversial opinion here. Controversial in the sense that, look, every single thing has a purpose, right? And so this one technology, write once, target everything, usually gives you handcuffs. Handcuffs in the sense that, like, for this phone, for the phone, we're trying to build a phone experience. We're trying to target a user experience for someone that is on a small screen, right? So, and I boil everything down at the end of the day. A lot of people want to think about technology. No. Let's take it one step back. Let's think about our customer, right? Let's start with the customer, because what are they going to do? And so when we think about that, it's all about the user experience. So am I going to take a code base that's tailored specifically for that user on that phone and then try to explode that to desktop? What's that going to feel like? And what's your code base going to look like? Are you going to have a lot of escape hatches to render out to desktop? What's the structure going to look like? Am I going to have a lot of if statement? Like, what are we going to do here? And so React Native, by the way, also can target the web. If you just take a normal Expo app, you can run it on the web and it will work fine. You can target all three platforms. So it's a moot point between Flutter and React Native to an extent, because with React Native, you can already target the web. I just wanted to get that out of the way. But back to my controversial opinion, which is when you're building the mobile experience, you're focusing on the mobile user. And when you're focusing on the mobile user, what you want to do is tailor that experience completely to that user. Now, where I think React Native shines here for the most part is React looks a lot like React Native. React Native. They look the same. They do something different. And you can still share between React and React Native to an extent, but I would still have separate code bases and I would have separate experiences. But the adoption between both, right? Like in terms of like your knowledge, your context switching. This is also something I think about heavily. Context switching. Do you really want in the middle of your day to switch from, this to that? And then there's an argument for like one code base, one language. But if we're going with the analogy that I'm saying that like both experiences need to be built separately, then we get into the space of, well, do we go with one language for all, or do we go with like Angular and Flutter, or do we go with React and React Native? And personally, I'd rather go from React to React Native because it's a lower bar to context switch between. So, there's a lot of decisions to make in that particular question and a lot of nuance, but I like to approach it from that space that I just explained, which is the user. And so I like to keep my React Native apps, and I like to keep my React apps. And so what I'm saying is my web app is my web app, my mobile app is my mobile app. Get it? Now, that controversial opinion aside, what I will say here is that if you do want to go with one language targeting all platforms, both Flutter and React Native give you that ability. You're definitely going to run into issues when scaling up your UI or scaling down your UI, but it's possible with both. This question gives, this is a deep one, this next one. So bear with me here. Flutter versus React Native, which one will thrive? Well, that depends on how you look at it, right? One is backed by Google. The other is backed by Facebook. Both gigantic companies. Which one will thrive? Well, React Native has a high level of market adoption, right? A lot of people use it. Versus Flutter, which has decent market adoption. I won't say that it's not around. And definitely my previous consultancy where I used to work, where I was advocating for React Native in the beginning, has moved partially to Flutter because it was an easier barrier to entry for their Android devs and iOS devs to get into. But it's hard to find projects for it. And I'll say this, it depends on the decisions that React Native makes as a platform in the next year or two. They're rebuilding their bridge. They're doing a lot of cool things behind the scenes. And I believe that they're going to bridge the gap with Flutter. And by bridging that gap, have that same development experience, create better debugging tools, and just, blow them out of the water. But who's to say? Flutter is still, it has a decent community. It has decent, projects out there, and projects that you would grab. Like you have to do the smoke test, right? Do I grab this app and do I think it's native or non-native? And definitely with Flutter, you feel like it's native. So, and the same can be done with React Native. So it really depends on the decisions that React Native makes and where Flutter goes, because I still feel that although Flutter is with Dart, which works great, Dart's a great language, I feel like if they want a higher adoption rate, they should try to maybe step away from that in some way. Maybe if they had, TypeScript, it would help them. It's hard to say. Adoption is important, and adoption only comes through taking languages and utilizing languages that people know, and then it will go and spread through companies, because companies don't make decisions. Companies at the end of the day don't make decisions based on like, we're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're going to have 5 different technologies. No, that's not really what happens. And that's why React Native has gotten such a massive adoption, because a lot of companies took React and said, well, React Native fits pretty easily into this picture, and we'll deal with whatever comes our way from here, because it's easier for our developers and it's easier to hire for this, and it's easier to maintain with one team. Okay, so the last question about this: has the JavaScript bridge's performance caused issues for you in the past? One argument for using Flutter is that you don't need a JS bridge and that the performance is better because of that. Does the argument hold merit in your opinion? It does. And I have to be honest here. I have to take the L's with React Native where I can take them. And Flutter has done an amazing job from this perspective with their performance. And the bridge has definitely caused me issues in the past, but these issues specifically had to do with versioning of the iOS bridge versus what ran on Android, and certain functions in JavaScript not pointing across. And so, there's a lot of deeper level debugging and puzzle work that went into it back in 2016 that has gotten way better. And especially with Expo coming into the picture and commoditizing and democratizing React Native, it's definitely become easier. But yeah, it's true. It holds merit. And Flutter does have better, overall experience. Now, at a high level, what are the pros and cons of each? Well, Flutter has better performance, but React Native has better job opportunities, has better docs in my opinion, but that's my opinion. React Native overall holds a better democratization of your tech stack overall in a company. So there's a lot of pros and cons to each. Getting into it, like, definitely debugging is one that Flutter shines in versus React Native. React Native and debugging can be a bit more cumbersome. Some of Flutter's developer experience can be better, and is better in certain aspects for sure. And those are strong arguments. Don't get me wrong; they are strong arguments. But why use one versus the other? And I believe that I've gotten into that quite extensively. So why use React Native over Flutter? Well, if you're using React and you want to have that same developer experience, low context switching and so forth. And so again, which has better job opportunities? I would say React Native. It's pretty clear, and I think a quick Google search will tell you relatively the same thing. Now, which is easier to learn? I have to give it to React Native here, because if you know React, you don't need to learn Dart. And learning that language and learning the overhead of all of the nuances of that language and being productive, at the end of the day, React Native is just JavaScript. So, JavaScript, React, which is a very, very thin layer of an API, you're going to have a very easy time with React Native, because at the end of the day, it's just all JavaScript. And so one of the last questions in this category, less common, but React Native, than the React Native versus Flutter question, but there was still a question about React Native versus, for instance, NativeScript, specifically Svelte, and using Svelte with NativeScript. And so I thought I'd touch base on it, because, why use React Native over Svelte, or Svelte native rather, with NativeScript, and the pros and cons. Well, NativeScript, like React Native, has good maintainability, has a write once, run everywhere type of attitude. And the only reason I would pick it over React Native is, if you have an existing Svelte web code base and you're looking to expand and you want to use the same technology and you want to have that maintainability and performance isn't in a super high regard, because I still feel like React Native has better performance than NativeScript and feels more native. It has more of that poppiness that it pops in your hand when you run the app. Feel like it feels more native. So, but yeah, if you're looking for maintainability and looking for that write once, run everywhere type of mentality and kind of having that consolidated tech stack, definitely, it's a good choice. All right, so now that we covered that, if you're still not convinced about learning React Native, well, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to move into some more general questions. Can you create a React Native e-commerce app with WooCommerce or Shopify backend? Is this covered in the course? If not, is this something that can be added? You can most definitely build an e-commerce experience in React Native. Actually, one of my close friends worked for a company that built a small e-commerce experience in React Native, and you can use any type of e-commerce backend that supplies you an API to do this. Now, we don't specifically cover this in the course, but we do cover Stripe payments in a way that helps you kind of build out a payment system, right? If you were trying to do it without specifically Shopify or something else, we cover how to integrate Stripe and what that looks like. Now, is it something that can be added later on? It feels to me as if it would be more of its own holistic course because it's a broad thing. You're getting into Shopify or you're getting into specific e-commerce platform, and so you really want to dig deep on how all of those things work. But we'll look at it and we'll think about it. Now, the next question is, can a React Native app code base be used to create a PWA? What is the best way to achieve this? Is it covered in the course? And if not, is it something that can be added? Now, in this particular course, in this React Native course, we focused primarily on Android and iOS. We did not focus on the cross-platform functionality. And this is because of my belief that a native app should stay native and that native experience is meant to be a native experience for the user. It comes into that whole philosophy of user first. And so, although from a tech stack perspective, using one code base to target everything is great, you usually fall short on the execution. I haven't seen it work out in a tremendous way where a company hasn't had to lift and shift out of this escape hatch that is React Native for everything. Do we cover this in the course? No, we do not cover this in the course. Is it something that you can achieve? Yes, it is. Will it be something that we add? Probably not. Probably something that we won't tackle in this course specifically. But what I can tell you is after this course, you can go and use Expo to achieve this. You can definitely do that. Another common one out there was around Expo. And so let's tackle a few of those. Does ZTM React Native course use Expo or vanilla React Native? Because in real world apps, we don't use Expo, do we? This is a good question, and you're giving me a lot to think about, and I like that. Now, what I can say is Expo has come a long way, and I've personally talked to the contributors and the maintainers in the past, and back in 2016, 2017, 2018, around that time, it was fairly early in the way that it worked, and it had some not so savory ways of dealing with React Native. But these days, it has become a stable platform on which we can build React Native apps. In real world applications, using Expo to start off and then escaping out usually is good enough. Good enough meaning that for 90% of the apps out there that are just starting off for a small company or a side project or whatever the case is, I would recommend starting with Expo. Now, if you're trying to migrate an existing app that has native code, I would start with the vanilla version of React Native because it allows you so much more control. If you're more experienced developer, I would also start off with the vanilla React code base. Vanilla React Native code base because it offers you way more freedom if you're an experienced mobile developer and whatnot. If you're a web developer with little to no experience or minimal experience, it really doesn't benefit you to start with vanilla React Native because you're just going to hit brick walls left and right, and it's going to slow you down. And everything in a company, everything in a job is about productivity. How fast can you deliver features? Because what I've learned throughout my career and in the 7 years that I've done this, speed and ease of use and turnaround time matter most. Now, we all love to tinker with technology, and I know, I personally love it too. But you have to make decisions that make sense. And so if you know what you're doing and you're pretty deep into the technology stack and you have to migrate something or you have to do some more complex things and you have to write some native code, upfront, I would start with vanilla. If you're a web developer just needing to build a quick mobile app, a turnaround for your company, get it out there and see what happens. Start with Expo. It'll make it easy and you'll learn along the way and you can find your way into Vanilla.js. You could potentially migrate into Vanilla.js because at the end of the day, all you're doing is moving around some JavaScript and there are some configuration that will pose you challenges. But also the Expo way of upgrading makes it way easier because upgrading React Native apps, I hate to say it, but it can be hard. So if you start with the vanilla route, that can be a difficult tripping point. Now here's another good question. What's my opinion on Expo? And this is a very good question because I have had personally the pleasure of talking to the people behind Expo. And what I can tell you is that, I've had a love-hate relationship with Expo for the past couple of years. And not because it's not good. A lot of senior people will come in and tell you, Expo sucks. I don't want to do Expo. It's going to make horrible decisions. It really depends. It depends. I have a nuanced approach to things. What does seniority mean? Seniority means making decisions that best suit the outcome of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, a lot of people look at Expo and say, Expo is locking you into all of these decisions and it's making horrible decisions for you and it's just making everything slow. And, if you go vanilla, everything's going to be fast. It depends on what you're doing, to be honest. Like 99% of the apps that we build aren't really all too difficult or have all of these requirements that are too crazy. I will say, straight out of the gate, the vanilla React Bare app is, way more configurable. You have way more options. You can control way more things. You have the escape hatches to native right at your fingertips. You have way more in your hands. The control is there. But the thing is, what if you don't know what you're doing, right? What if this is your first time in native development? What are you going to do? You want to hit brick walls every time you're trying to learn something? Because that's what happens when you do vanilla Bare.js installs, and I can tell you this from personal experience. I've wasted 6 to 8 hours of my day sometimes looking at some obscure error that is happening in the build process, and that didn't happen in Expo because Expo is commoditizing and generalizing the experience, right? It's making it an easy entry point and giving you an escape hatch because now you can eject and go to that vanilla Bare installation. Okay, of course, Expo is still putting its tooling inside of your Bare installation. And, some developers may not like that. And a lot of senior developers are kind of fickle that way. But it really depends because what I would say is if you're new, if you're getting into the space, if you haven't done this before, or if you're in a company and you don't have any experience doing this, pick the lowest bar to entry to get to market. Pick the fastest route. And then once you're there, assess. Because at the end of the day, you can take all of the code you wrote in Expo, you can start a bare vanilla workflow, and you can port over everything you had, and there you go. Or you can eject, and you can have that bare workflow with the Expo tooling on top. So the argument to me of senior React Native developers saying that Expo is crap really doesn't hold much in my opinion because, those who call themselves senior, but then go and, assault a choice that creates that lowers the barrier to entry of a technology when you're trying to get something out to market. Because what we're trying to do at the end of the day with anything at all, unless you're trying to, get into some hardcore type of game space or whatnot, what we're trying to do is get to market. We're trying to build products. We're trying to get to market. We're trying to make our businesses succeed. And speed matters, and ease of understanding matters. And at the end of the day, what you want to do, everything's a trade-off. Every single thing's a trade-off. So what I can tell you is write your code in a way that you can later on port it if you need to. And how do you write code that you can port? Well, maybe don't lock yourself into too many Expo libraries that you have to go change then, right? Or lock yourself into the Expo libraries, but make sure that when you lock yourself in, you're already documenting potential alternatives outside of that space and whatnot. But it really depends on what the comfortability is of the individual trying to go into that space. If this is your very first time building a native application, I would say that, Expo really has your back. It makes everything easy. It makes everything straightforward. If you have a lot of experience in mobile development, go ahead and start off with the full vanilla bare workflow, because it'll give you more options and more configurability, or if you're trying to do a migration. But if you're just trying to get a product market fit, something quickly out to market, trying to build something easy, why not take the easy route? Why bother yourself with all of the configuration you would need to go through and all of the management you would need to go through? Expo is giving you all of this tooling, and it's not to say in the past the tooling wasn't all there. And I knew specifically of some senior developers that had difficult times migrating out of Expo. But these days, with their eject functionality and how they've shifted their stack, they make updating easier. They make releasing easy. They give you a lot of tools out of the box. And specifically, like what I really like about it is how easy they make it for every single person to get into it. Their snack interface, absolutely amazing in being able to take React Native to the web and kind of share those native experiences. That wasn't possible without React Native and Expo. Like running an Expo client in the web and being able to take that code and share it around. That's absolutely amazing. That's a game changer. That was a game changer in the industry. But and it made the docs interactive. Like people want to give Expo a hard time, but ease up on Expo. They're the good guys. They're trying to do something good in the space. Now, do you need a really good laptop to run React Native, or can a normal laptop run Expo and React Native? This is a good question. I would say, a really, really good laptop will give you really, really good benefits, obviously. Do you need a super good laptop to run React Native? No, not really. Not with Expo, at least. If you're running a decent-ish laptop, you have a decent amount of RAM and a decent amount of space, you should be okay for the most part. And as long as you run it on your device instead of running the emulator, what you really want to do if you don't have the specifications to run the emulator is use your phone. Use your phone to run the app and use the QR code, even in local development, to make sure that you don't overrun your laptop with things to do. Now, the next question is, do you cover animations beyond the basics, such as using animated V2? If not, do you plan on adding this to the course, or do you have any resources that you would suggest? Now, we cover animations to an extent for what we would call polish. We add some animations for fade in, fade out. We have a Lottie animation that we add. Is this an in-depth animation course? No, not really. Do we plan on potentially adding it throughout the course? Yeah, we will definitely look into all possibilities of extending that knowledge base out to our students. But for now, if you're looking for getting into that in-depth animation space and really tinkering with animations, we don't cover too much of that. We do cover animations. We do cover the animation API for some of the polish that we do. But in terms of resources, there are many resources out there, and a Google search takes you farther than specific ones that I can suggest, because I learned animated on my own, and I kind of went through the motion of building animations that way. There are some good resources out there, though. Now, what's your opinion on state management and cache management in React Native? State management is one of those things that with the introduction of, and the reintroduction of context and a stable context in React has become, a new topic of discussion, let's say. Now, I'm still a big advocate of Redux in some scenarios, especially when you have large-scale application that need centralized state management and, the immutability and all that. I wouldn't go towards context for that. But for instance, in the course, we primarily use context. I'm a big believer that, state management in React Native, keep it light and keep it structured and keep it in a way that you could eventually migrate it. That's the number one way I measure my code is I have a zero ego policy. I'm not the type of programmer who comes in and says the code I write needs to be here a year from now. No, like everything evolves, constraints evolve, the business evolves, the requirements evolve. Why would my code, if I leave the company or if I'm not around or whatever, why would my code have to stand that test of time when the requirements are changing, the business is changing? No, what I like to do is I like to approach it again in a pragmatic way. The code I write solves the problem in a way that is extensible, maintainable. Maintainable is so important. But on top of that, what we need to be aware of is that ego in code kills the team. How many times have you been on a team where someone comes in and says, no, you have to do it this way? And then you're like, well, why do we have to do it? And don't get me wrong, sometimes they're right. Like there are best practices. You have to follow the best practices. But in some cases, doing it a certain way could lock you into bad architecture, like architecting everything up front. I'm not a believer in that. I'm a believer that you make decisions and those decisions evolve and the code evolves and you always have to revisit things. There's too little of that in the industry. There's too little of that. Let me go back to what I wrote and change it. Let me go refactor. Let me go adapt. Let me write things that are adaptable. A lot of times in the industry, we get into this sunken cost fallacy where we're like, well, if I don't write it perfectly the first time, I'm just wasting my time. No, you're never going to get things perfect from the first go, ever. No matter how smart you are as a developer, no matter how experienced you are as a developer, you're never ever going to get it right from the first go. It's just not possible. The requirements evolve, the business evolves, everything evolves. Now you can get the infrastructure right, you can get the best practices right, you can get the configuration right, the setup right, but you're never going to write the features 100% correct from the first go. You're never going to write anything 100% from the first go. Now, that long-winded tangent is to say that, well, I kind of went off from the state management question, but to get back to it, what I wanted to get at with the state management is it's important in React Native, but it has to emerge naturally, right? Whether you choose Redux or you choose context depends on the scale of your application and what you're trying to accomplish. So don't get locked into one or the other, but really assess your needs and really assess what works for you. And, in this course, you're going to see us use context, and you can naturally then go and evolve that experience into, well, should I use this here, or should I use Redux here, or should I use something else here? And state management is important in any app you write. It's one of the revelations that web brought with it that, traditional mobile development didn't have back in the day, and struggled for it because state and Java developers the same way. State would be everywhere. It wouldn't be centralized, all these things, or you'd have singletons everywhere. Like there are a lot of drawbacks that happened before we did state management in the front end. A lot of which I don't want to get into, but it is important. And so to get to cache management, persistence is important. I would say that, the caching images is extremely important. React Native fast image, blowback to my friend Dylan, who has that amazing library out there, definitely useful. And cache management is pretty good in React Native, but it depends on what you're trying to cache, obviously. So, there are persistence libraries. This is one of the things that, I think vanilla React Native does a bit better than Expo, for instance, with the caching and the persistence, but in the availability of libraries, rather. Now, in the long run, will React Native be sufficient as a real native app? And, all these questions are making me think really hard. I like it, but, it will. depending on the scenarios that you're trying to achieve, right? In the long run, as long as you're not exploding your app into, if you have a live stock trading app, you may run into some issues that, you just can't account for when you're doing like JavaScript. But you still have the escape hatch to native, and you still have the option to build a native screen. So in the long run, I would say yes, because you can still always build that full native code, that full native visualization when you need to. Now, do we need to learn Kotlin or Swift, or do we use any native features? For this course, we opted to leverage Expo and keep it to the strict flow of utilizing React Native, like learning React Native itself. Because Kotlin and Swift and those native features, Expo has a lot of built-in packages. And I have this philosophy: why would we reinvent the wheel? If there's a package that's doing something for us and it's tried and true and it's stable, we don't need to go and try to implement it ourselves. Now, I have worked on a native app where, for instance, I needed to build a native camera module completely from the ground up. Like, the team had to go and build it, and we had to build an engine for it, and it had to do some processing. And there are use cases for this. In that case, yes, you might need, that native experience. But for the apps that we're building and the flow that we're building, it covers what you would see in the majority of applications that you would eventually build. And so we wanted to keep it strictly to that flow of learning the React Native interface. And from there, giving you that solid foundation to go on and study and learn on your own. Because that's one thing as an instructor that, I truly believe in is, when you come into this industry, a lot of times, a lot of things will try to throw too much at you. But it's really about the foundation you build. Because if you have a strong foundation, everything after that is like Legos that you layer, like that you click on top, right? And so that strong foundation is very important. So we focus specifically on React Native and that React Native interface, so that you really understand the core of React Native and the flow. And from there, you can go and you can experiment with these things. And so the final category of questions, basically just everything else and a random number of career questions. How long will it take to learn React Native and get hired as a mobile app developer? It's a question I get asked fairly often, even in the SQL course. Like, how long will it take? And I have to be honest with you. It depends on how deeply you apply yourself to the material, how deeply you learn React Native and apply yourself and understand the material. And there's no given trajectory I can give you. It's about repetition, and, learning and reading and reaffirming your knowledge. There's no easy way here, right? The career path is not one. A career path is not one that you take shortcuts. It's an uphill battle, and we're trying to give you that path that takes you like 90% of the way there, and you got to push 10%, and that like with everything, that last 10% is hard, because that's the fundamental understanding that you need to gain. And we're trying to teach you all of the core skills, but you need to apply yourself. Now, what type of apps would I need to show in my portfolio to get a job in React Native for a junior dev versus an intermediate versus a senior dev? This is a good question. I've never had to specifically, like, I do a lot of hiring, and I've never specifically asked someone, like, show me your apps. Now, you can show apps in your portfolio, and it gives you a very, very strong base. Always, if you have some in your base, show them. But the difference between a junior versus an intermediate versus a senior is usually you're talking about problems that you've solved when you go from junior into intermediate and senior. You're talking about all of these problems that you faced, how you solved them, what you ran into. It's about that experience-based application of your knowledge. It's less so about like, hey, see what I did here, because, I've worked on projects where I've written 2 lines of code, but I can go ahead and show you, hey, I wrote this app in an interview, and the moment they start asking questions, it's going to be like, did you? right? So it's about explaining what you did, how you did it, and showcasing it is a very strong argument, but it's about like taking those problem statements that you faced and really explaining those. Now, in terms of what types of projects, it really doesn't matter, what type of difficulty you faced. It matters more that you have a little bit of variety. But even if it's only been one, because you could work on a project, one single app for years and years, this is possible. So it's just important to have those problem statements and talk about the process, talk about the team, talk about how you managed things. You have to hit a couple of different markers in order to go from, like, junior developers love to talk about code and I solved all of these problems. I got really into like styled components and this and that. And intermediate and senior devs, they talk more about, okay, well, here was the architectural challenge. This is what we needed to accomplish. This was our long-term goal. Senior devs talk about, this is how I manage the team. This is how I pull together the resources. This is how we face deadlines. And you face different career challenges at these levels. And it's not something that you can necessarily fake or showcase just through raw app development skills. There are certainly apps that showcase senior development experience, like if you have a stock trading app, but and you could explain everything that went into it and the performance and all that stuff. But I view seniority as, and a lot of industries actually view seniority as more of like part management, part technical excellence, and part like experience. What isn't included in the Zero to Mastery React Native course that I would need to know to become an actual mobile dev and get hired as a mobile dev? Well, what do you mean by like a real mobile dev, right? Are we talking like an iOS developer? Are we talking an Android developer? Because if you're talking iOS developer, well, you're going to need to learn Objective-C and Swift. If you're talking Android developer, you're going to have to learn Kotlin or Java. And those are very different trajectories than React Native itself. But if you're talking about what else do I need to know about React Native to get hired? We teach you pretty much the fundamentals and some advanced concepts of pretty much everything that you would need to know in order to take an app and release it. So you're learning the whole process end to end. And that gives you the solid foundation, again, to have the knowledge to be, knowledgeable in an interview of the entire process that goes into mobile development. It really comes down to how much you apply yourself to what exactly needs to happen in the software development lifecycle. It comes down to what kind of role you're looking for, right? If you're, again, it goes back to that junior versus intermediate versus senior role. If you're shooting for the moon senior and you don't really have any experience, I would say that you need to really apply yourself to the materials and really apply yourself to research and trying things out and really understanding and showcasing in an interview all of the versatility you have. Okay, so from there, so many junior and entry-level React Native jobs ask 1 to 2 years of experience. Do you have any tips on how to actually get a React Native job as a junior developer with no professional work experience? Learn as much as you can about React Native, about how to use it, about everything that goes into the lifecycle. And this course will give you such a strong base for that. Now, learn everything there is to learn about the pathway of React Native and the internals. And this course will give you a lot of that and the deployment process to production. And then also, dabble in the vanilla React Native, the base projects. Look into and research how to write those native extensions if possible. Really apply yourself to the material inside the course, but also broader outside the course and absorb as much as possible, because at the end of the day, the foundation we give you, the mastery that we're trying to give you is one mastery, right? I have 7 years of experience in the industry. Mastery only comes from that continuous hunger to learn. And so that continuous hunger to learn is applying yourself to the material in the course and outside of the course. Should I still apply for these jobs? And how can I stand out if I get interviews? even without the 1 or 2 years to professional experience. So the 1 or 2 years to professional experience is basically like a gateway. They're trying to filter out people. Never lie about experience, or in my personal opinion, I can sniff it out in an interview. So, I tell people usually don't lie about your experience. It doesn't, like, if you have an experienced interviewer, they're gonna sniff it out. But still apply for the jobs. Apply for anything and everything. Never stop applying for the interview. Like, get into the scene. Like, grind. Like, you need to apply yourself and really get out there. Like, the more opportunities you shoot for, the more opportunities you may potentially have. Like, but if you shoot for less, you're just, limiting your options. But apply yourself, even without the professional experience. If you can showcase confidence, if you can showcase knowledge, if you can showcase hunger to learn, because too often people are timid in interviews. You need to showcase that hunger to learn, that drive, and you need to have humility. If they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, you like, the interviews that I've found the best are where someone comes up to me and says, well, I don't know that particular thing you're talking about, but would you please mind explaining it to me? Right? And when they ask that, I can see that they want to know. And based on their response and how they riff off and how they talk to me, I can assess, first of all, their hunger, their knowledge, their passion, because someone can always, like, if you're shooting for a junior position, they're going to want to teach you anyways. So you have to showcase that you want to be taught as well. Now, the next question is, with so many skills that are required of full stack engineers, how do you choose what to focus on? This is a good question. Now, we have a full series of the developer roadmap that are here on YouTube, which you outline the skills that you can learn and need, so you can check those out as well. It really, it's hard because, like I said in the beginning of the AMA, it boils down to getting that solid foundation across all of them. Now, if you're focusing on JavaScript and you're focusing on React, you pick the technologies that go hand in hand with React. So you would pick like React Native, you would pick Node.js, and you would learn everything there is to know about these three. And then you've garnered a sort of a full stack, right? And so it really depends. If you're going down the route of Python, what goes hand in hand with Python? Well, if you're doing web development in Python, Django is obviously out there. There's other things to fill the gaps. But Python also goes hand in hand with React, I find, if you're just trying to build a simple API. So it really depends on just garnering the technologies that help complement each other. But feel free to reach out to those resources that we have, those series of developer roadmaps. Now, another question is, it seems like the course covers mostly beginner and intermediate topics. If I already have knowledge, will this course be useful to me? And what are the best resources to learn advanced topics in React Native? Now, this is a very, very good question, right? Because what is considered an advanced topic? Well, first of all, I would consider advanced topics like in React Native to be migrations, right? Migrating a native app into React Native, animate like deep animations, deep anything. But we do cover, some of those things, but not probably to the extent that maybe you are expecting, having a lot of knowledge. What I will say is that this course will be a great addition to your arsenal, because the app that we're building looks lovely. It may show you some tips and tricks and some code patterns, some architecture patterns, because I'm a big advocate of architecture, and I put some in the course, not overly heavy, not overly abstract, but some structure in the course that you may find useful, some technology choices you may find useful. And so I would say that from that perspective, you can gain a lot, especially when we get into Firebase and Stripe. You can gain a lot from the course. When you go specifically into deep React Native territory, you want to continuously research out inside the course, you'll find some things, but outside the course, you'll find specifically what you're looking for. It depends on what you're looking for in terms of an advanced topic. You really need to pinpoint one advanced topic and then, research that. But I do deeply, I wouldn't put out a course unless I felt like it would benefit everyone for every experience level. Even if it doesn't teach you necessarily React Native, You may learn some tips and tricks. You may learn some architecture. You may refresh some of your knowledge. And even then, you'll just have an amazing app to showcase. So the last question here. Hi, I want to start my mobile app business. So I'm very interested in enrolling in the React Native course. At the moment, I am enrolled in the complete web developer course and I am finishing the advanced JavaScript topics. Since I want to build a mobile app and soon I will have more basic JavaScript knowledge, do you suggest I skipped the React part of the web development course in order to take it from the React section of the React Native course? I'm asking because I am new, and will you teach React from scratch? I'm a bit confused at the path to follow right now. Now, the React Native course does offer a React refresher course inside of the course. If you have I would not skip on the option to take the React section in the web development course, because if you're completely new to React, it really bodes you well to build that solid foundation. So build it in the web development course. Then I would say take the refresher, and a lot of the topics will be familiar to you, but take the refresher, and then you can get into the React Native space, because at the end of the day, React, really the foundation of React is something that, if you have the option to take with you, you should definitely take it with you. But we do offer a refresher for those who may be new to it or have prior experience but have forgotten a little bit of it. So yeah, I would say take it in the web development course and then come on over and I'll be more than happy to teach you. Well, obviously the course is recorded, but I really, I'm happy that, the students in this community are so thoughtful to send in all of these questions. I've been really, amazed and astounded by each and every one of you that has reached out and has learned so much, even from the SQL course. So if you've actually made it all the way to this point, I really hope it was because I was able to provide some insightful answers and not just ramble incessantly, but actually provide some substance, and that you just didn't run away from the video thinking, well, who is this guy? But and forget about me. But kidding aside, thank you so much for sticking around. And please feel free to reach out to me. Check out my ZTM bio profile page in the description, and you can find my social links, or leave a comment on the video below to say hi. Or join the ZTM Academy to start taking the complete React Native developer course. Come say hi to me in the React Native channel on our ZTM Discord server. Thanks again for joining. I really appreciate it, and I hope you really enjoy the course.